What we then started piecing together in terms of the soundscape was that they were on our floor and they were kicking in doors and they were executing people because it was just single shots. And you'd hear like a single shot and then a bit quiet and then another single shot, but closer. And it felt like we were kind of waiting to die. I grew up in North London, Finsbury Park, Crouch End. In many ways, I feel like I had quite an idyllic childhood for someone who grew up in London. In actual fact, I think what's interesting now, just looking back on my life before my injury, is I kind of see that there were no real barriers to me living a life that I kind of wanted to choose. Not that I knew what I wanted to do, of course, but it kind of weighed on my mind a little bit. I really didn't have any clear ambitions. And I think that was reflective in some of the kind of choices I made in education. They weren't really that coherent. And I went to university and I made a mess of the degree and I didn't end up getting anything. And actually where I found myself from an earlier age was in the hospitality industry. That then sort of informed some of my work choices for the next few years, where I worked in hospitality and I managed a few bars and restaurants in and around Soho.
In 2008, what did life look like for you?
You know what, it's interesting because I've obviously done a few talks around what I've been through, and often how I define the period leading up to Mumbai in a way that kind of makes it sound as if I had my act together. And I kind of feel like I did. Like, I just started working relatively recently with a production company making adverts. And I've been in the job for maybe about a year and a half. So the work thing felt as if I was like, yes, this is something I can really get my teeth in. I loved hospitality, I loved working in bars, but I never saw it as a proper career. I was like, one day I will own my own bar, and I'm glad that I've worked here and I've met all these people. But working in that production company, I just loved it. And I was in a newish relationship, and that felt pretty good. And honestly, I was like, this is it. Life is good. I was 27, 28 years old. We just moved to a basement flat in Camden. It was like, okay, cool. I'm doing the thing. You know, I'm working in Soho. I'm going to be a film director one day, and I've got a cool girlfriend.
And then you went to India. What took you to India?
Leisure, relaxation, holiday. I'd never been. My partner had been. She loved it. And let's go to Goa. On the date that we were actually meant to depart, we got to the airport and went to check in, and they were like, visas? And we didn't have our visas. And so we were both just like, what? And there's a sort of a small irony that we weren't even meant to be in India at the time of the attack. But yeah, anyway, so we had to postpone the trip for about a week while we scrambled and got our visas together.
How does that make you feel looking back at that now?
It's just how it is. It's like the stars aligned, and sometimes they align for good and sometimes for bad. Sometimes it seems like it's bad and it's not all that bad. But yeah, we did what you do in Goa. You know, we chilled out. I played football on the beach with the locals. We scored some, cheap hashish, that type of thing. And just relaxed. And basically the way the flights were on the way back was that we had a stopover in Mumbai. And so it was like, well, what do we do? We might as well treat ourselves to a bit of luxury, rather than sort of scramble her out to kind of make the connecting flights work. So we arrived back in Mumbai. We got to the hotel, which was the Taj Palace down near the gate of India. The hotel was incredible. I mean, it's a destination, right? And it's got kind of an old world, new world about it. It's huge. It's got like 8 restaurants, incredibly ornate. Everything is just oversized. But yeah, it just felt very traditional, and very kind of opulent. And you're like, ooh, we're going to have to be smart here. We checked in under my partner's name and were shown to our room on the 3rd floor. And at this point, it was kind of quite early evening. So we had quite a lot of time before dinner, and we actually just dropped our bags and did a little tour of the area and got back to the hotel and just started preparing for dinner. that's kind of where it all started kicking off, really. So my partner was putting on her makeup in the bathroom, and I think I was just putting on a shirt, and it was really weird because I heard what essentially was a gunshot, but I didn't know because I've never heard a gunshot before. It's not a car backfiring. It's not a firework. It had this sort of dead reverberation to it. And you're like, that's weird. And I just remember looking out the window, and what had been a really busy area, because it's this kind of huge tourist destination, just was empty. It's just like, there's no one there. Oh, and there's a guy hiding behind a car. Huh, that's weird. And then you hear it again. You're like, oh, that's a bit closer. And so there was this kind of sense of like, oh, right, okay, that could be a gunshot. And it's now nearer to our location. And then gradually it just got louder and louder and closer and closer. And you're like, right, this is happening from within the hotel. This is happening inside the building we're in. We basically at that moment decided to leave the room, because we're on this sort of, you've got these kind of internal kind of mezzanine style things, and went down the corridor to where the big staircase was. And it was this huge square thing, like huge staircase. And you kind of look down it, and there's sort of just smoke. I guess that's gun smoke. And I remember looking across the stairway, and there was another guest, and he had blonde hair and these circular glasses, and we kind of just caught eye contact, and we kind of just shook each other's head like that. And basically, both of us just turned around, retreated, went back to our room. And we're in the room, we locked the door, okay, let's barricade it. And we were like, right, well, it's one of two scenarios. It's either this lone gunman who's going to run out of ammo, or there's a hostage situation going to unfold. And we're like, right, well, basically either scenario, we just need to stay put. Like, we just need to stay where we are, like out of the way. There's plenty of people down there. We don't know the layout of the hotel that well. We don't know whether we can make a sort of hasty escape, because we just don't know how many people there are.
Was there a definitive moment that you recognised you were in a terrorist situation?
Yeah, I called my dad. What did I expect him to do? I don't know. But he was really good. He was like, all right, I'm going to make some calls. I don't know who he thought he was going to call. He doesn't have any connections. But he did actually call the British consulate, and he did call me back, and he confirmed that, yes, this was a situation. This was a terrorist situation. It was just kind of abstract that this was happening. And you start playing through the scenarios, like, what would MacGyver do? What would Bruce Willis in Die Hard do? Like, and you're like, these are now resources. These aren't like fiction films. These are now like, right, so if I recall correctly, we should be able to access the panels of the bathroom wall. No, everything's sealed shut. There's no accessing the ceiling. On our floor, there was a cupboard. I remember seeing, I was like, maybe we get out, maybe we go and hide in the cupboard. It's like, no, what are you playing at? Like, we just stay where we are. We lock the door. So we were calm, and we were kind of mindful that in any scenario, we just didn't want to be seen. It was like a theatrical experience, because we're in this room, and the whole thing is going off around us, like in this sort of like soundscape. It's explosions, it's gunshots. What we then started piecing together in terms of the soundscape was that they were on our floor, and they were kicking in doors, and they were executing people, because it was just single shots. And you'd hear like a single shot, and then a bit quiet, and then another single shot, but closer.
What goes through your head when you're
Well,
hearing those approaching shots?
this was like it. This was like the apex. This was the crunch time, where suddenly we have been ambient passengers to now we're going to be in this. Okay, what do we do? Right, you got the door to the hotel room. You've got the bathroom door is right here. We're in the bathroom. We're going to draw the curtain to the bath. We're going to stand behind the door of the bathroom. I'm going to hold a cutlery fork. They're going to walk in. They're going to see the curtain. They're going to think we're in there. They're going to walk forward towards that, and I'm going to stab him in the neck with a fork. And that was the plan. Like that was the plan. And we must have been in that like position, I don't know, half an hour, 20 minutes, just waiting. And it felt like we were kind of waiting to die, I think, at that point, because I don't think a cutlery fork was really going to stand up to an AK, or a pistol or whatever. And you know what? Honestly, the fact that they never kicked through that door, yeah, I still feel pretty happy about that.
Do you know why they didn't? Do you know why they didn't get to your door?
Don't know, and I have seen footage, security footage of them doing this. So we know that our visualization of events was pretty accurate. But I don't know why they didn't kick down our door. What I do know is that after a while, what became clear was that the building had taken a lot of damage. There had been a lot of explosions. And at some point, and then back onto the phone to my dad, and he said, look, it's on fire. You're in the old part of the building. This has to be part of your decision-making process now, like in terms of getting out. We realized that the room we were in was like pretty sealed shut. Like I said, the windows, traditional 3-bay window, but double glazed, bolted shut. So we couldn't open any of the windows. We're 60 feet up. We can't go out the front because A, there's terrorists, B, there's a fire, and C, we don't know where the hell we're going. So what we're going to do, let's make a rope. So there was a pair of little, stationary scissors, cut the curtains down. We got the sheets, we got towels, everything that we could. Tied together this rope, did like a tug of war in the room, kind of tested its strength, felt all right. And basically there was this little round marble table with kind of wrought iron legs, little writing table. Picked that up, threw it against the window. It bounced off. Okay. Right. Pick it up again, give it a bit more welly, smash the window. Once we had the window broken and we tied this rope to the table and we sort of flung it out, we could really get a sense of like, right, we're high. We're like, it was, because it was 3rd floor, but old building, and there were just layers and layers to it. So it's like, felt like 60 feet or something. And I don't think the rope went to the floor. I mean, it was like, if you're peering over and you're kind of like, yeah, it's hanging down. I think it will be all right. Like, we'll be able to get far enough that we can then drop. But at this point, there's sort of the decision-making, I think, happened quite quickly. I think we were like, there's no point on dilly-dallying here. There was like this, this dual threat of like, the building's on fire. It could collapse. We don't know. If we sit on the windowsill for too long, we might get shot. There could be terrorists all around. There's no police, there's no fire, there's no ambulance, there's no army. We just got to do this. And so the rope had gone down. I basically looked and I was like, yeah, all right. And I kind of told my girlfriend I loved her and I gave her a kiss on the cheek and I was like, right, I'll go first. I remember the point at which I was sort of still on the windowsill and holding the rope, and then you kind of like take your hand off the windowsill and you're like, right, my weight is now fully on this rope and I'm just gonna go for it. Within 10 seconds or so of being on this rope, maybe like a couple of meters from the windowsill, I felt the knot slipping. Like, my brain was like, yep, this isn't holding. These knots aren't holding. And I honestly, there was this real sense of like, and you're dead, like, and this, like, the knots are going to go, and you're going to fall, and you're not going to survive this. And this all happened in like a microsecond, because essentially I passed out before I hit the ground. My brain basically said, you don't need to be around for this, you don't need to see this. And I had a bit of an out of body experience. And again, in the movie, like, theme that sort of seems to embody a lot of this, it was like Alan Rickman in Die Hard. It was like I saw myself from like fixed camera, gone, like, and from that moment I was dead. Like, I'm not surviving this. And that's all I really remember with clarity, because after that I'm out for the count. Someone had seen me fall, someone else on the ground. This guy, he sees me fall, he then flags down an ambulance, somehow manages to successfully do that, gets me scooped up into an ambulance. By virtue of that, they then know my partner's in the room. They then get a fire engine with a cherry picker and get her out. And eventually I come round probably 12 hours, 24 hours later, and I'm in a hospital bed, and I've got plaster casts up my arm, and I've got plaster casts up that arm, and I've got a metal cage sticking out my body, and I'm just sort of, you know, morphined up to the max, and my partner's there, and I'm alive. Essentially, I'd landed on my arse, and so that was the point of spinal injury. But seemingly, I'd put my hands down as well, because I'd completely smashed my wrist to absolute bits. It's an absolute miracle that it works in any degree, because I had some big reconstructive surgery on that. I'd smashed my elbow, which is why I can't extend beyond this point, and I'd fractured my pelvis and punctured my lung. So everything had just sort of happened in this region, which is incredibly lucky that I didn't hit my head. I mean, it's really the reason why I'm here today in any capacity. So I sustained a spinal injury at T10, T12, which is waist level. And all I really knew from that was that they had operated on it, and I couldn't really move, like my lower body. And I wasn't really asking any questions. I kind of didn't really want to know at that point. But the whole time in the hospital in India was eerie, because there was still one or two terrorists that hadn't been caught. Hospitals had been a target, so there was a sense that still a threat. At night, it just felt really scary. You know, I'm completely powerless. And that pervaded until I was fully, that feeling of not being safe remained until I was repatriated to the UK. As the flight came to the end and it sort of, the plane banks over London, you know, I think we landed in Gatwick, and I saw the Thames, and it was just like, man, that is relief. Like, that was the first moment of, wow, I'm safe. Eventually I make it to Stanmore, which is one of the homes of spinal injury. And at this point, I was still in the mind that I can heal myself out of this. This is going to be past tense, right? And I'm in the consultation with my dad and my partner and the consultant, Dr. Gould. She's an incredible woman, like really lovely and very calm. And she was talking about the classification of spinal injury. She said, look, there's two ways of classifying. It's either incomplete, where information and motor function can return, or you have a complete injury, and essentially what you have is frozen and locked in at that moment, and you have a complete injury.
What are those first instincts when you learn that? What do you think?
You know what? It's just sadness. It's just overriding sadness. And actually, I didn't realize it's grief. It's grief for a loss of yourself. Like there is a part of me that's sort of dead, both physically and conceptually. There's a life that you suddenly start imagining just like crumbling. You know, how am I gonna teach my unborn children how to ride a bike? How am I gonna play football ever again? How am I gonna do? And your mind just plays all the dirty tricks on you. You know. I did get discharged eventually in sort of the summer of 2009. And you know what? That first year was all right. Like honestly, it was okay. Like there was a lot to get used to. You had a guy in here recently, I know a guy called David Holmes, who's a stuntman for Daniel Radcliffe, who was opposite me the whole time.
In Istanbul.
In Istanbul, and he changed my life in the sense that we went through this together. His injury was higher up than mine, and his whole life was governed by his physicality. Like he would have been and was a world-class stuntman. His career would have been amazing, and suddenly, poof, gone. And his injury's up here, and he needs help getting out of bed, and my injury's here, and my life isn't governed around my physicality. All right, that's perspective straight away. Like, okay, it's not that it could be worse, but guess what? It could be worse. I'm now classified as a victim of terror and I'm disabled. And on the face of it, both these terms and descriptors are kind of negative. But by being in something like a terror attack, guess what? Organizations like you want to film me. And I'm able to leverage being in a terrorist attack to drive a narrative around disability inclusion. I mean, the whole point in doing this today is so that your audience can kind of see me in a wheelchair. That's really important. Like the normalization of disability as something that isn't negative is difficult for people who don't have any experience of disability. My conversations around disability now are based around the intolerance that I feel when I'm presented with barriers, both physical or financial or informational or human or whatever they are, to basically say, this is shit and it should be better. And it's not about fixing it for me, but it's about fixing it for the next gen. But from that sort of just kind of acceptance and conversations with people that I've done webinars for, actually, you know, one guy was actually like, Will, listen, get what you're saying about authentically speaking on behalf of yourself and other people, but could you like create like a disability Avengers team? I was like, that's not a bad idea, to be fair. And that was about 2 years ago. And I've now managed to build this little team of consultants that I've called the Disability Task Force. And there's 14 of us. And, you know, I've got 2 blind consultants, 2 deaf consultants. I've got a guy who's got Down syndrome. I've got 3 people neurodivergent. I've got 3 people with cerebral palsy. 1 person is tetraplegic. It's like, actually, that's starting to look a bit more representative. The hope is that I can sort of talk us into some interesting places.
You're intoxicatingly positive after such traumatic events. Did you ever have negative feelings towards the attackers?
With regards to the attackers themselves, I had quite early on an indication that it was a terrorist group that Lashkar-e-Taiba were of that extreme sort of religious arm that like to brainwash people. And I kind of knew that the terrorists themselves were actually really young, and they were about 17, 18. And I've heard the radio conversations that they have with their handlers, and they're doubting themselves. They're having doubts. They're having doubts that this is what God wants. And the handler is like, continue. This is the right thing. You do this, you'll get all you wish for. And I think I felt pity more than anything for those guys. Am I proud of myself? Yeah, I am. I'm proud of how I acted in the moment. Something like this happens, it gives you an opportunity, you know, and I think I took that opportunity and I've turned it into the proverbial positive. And you know what? I'm proud of myself for that.
We was trying to build on a wire stunt that I'd done a million times beforehand, And it was just one of those things that went wrong, unfortunately. My chest folded into my nose, my sternum winded me, and my spinal cord separated. I landed on a crash mat and was paralysed from that moment on.